broadcast. Hi, this is Stu Miniman with Wikibon here on the Amazon reInvent 2015 preview crowd chat. Joining me from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina is Brian Gracely. Brian, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Stu, great to see you. Hope things are going good up in the Boston area.
Yeah, absolutely. We're actually getting quite a bit of rain right now. I know you've had quite a bit down in North Carolina. We're going to go to some drier terrain in Las Vegas next week.
Yeah.
It's going to be my third year at Amazon reInvent. Brian, is this going to be your first time there?
Yeah, no, I've been out there. I think I've been out there all 4 years.
Oh.
So yeah, no, I've been out there, I think every year. A couple of times I was on the vendor side doing some intelligence gathering, and then I've been out there. To me, it's one of the big 3 or 4. If you're involved with infrastructure, if you're involved with sort of the operations of cloud, it's probably one of the big 3 or 4 shows of the year, along there with OpenStack Summit, VMworld, maybe Velocity for the open source crowd. But no, it's an exciting week, and it's growing like crazy.
All right, Brian. So what are some of the big things you're looking for at the show this year? My understanding, we're going to have somewhere between 15 and 20,000 people. So, I mean, it's growing at such a massive rate. It's a giant ecosystem out there, but, quite different, say, from the VMworld show that we were just at in San Francisco recently.
Right. To me, there's a lot of big things going on, and Amazon has moved from being the disruptor to sort of, to me, kind of defining the rules, at least for public cloud. The big things that I'll be looking for is what's the mix between startups and new companies and sort of small groups within companies, developers, things, and then how many sort of large big enterprises are going to be there. How many are saying, hey, we're all in, or we're moving all closer to being all in towards a public cloud first strategy. To me, that's going to be a big deal. Looking for examples in the more complicated verticals, so pharmaceuticals, healthcare, government, certain government agencies, finance, obviously. Those are big things to look at. How quickly are they adopting just public cloud in general, and then obviously Amazon services. And then be looking really heavily at what sort of vertical types of solutions they're going to be going after. In the past, Amazon has been very focused on delivering this really great horizontal toolbox for developers, lots of different tools. They're obviously a platform. They try and stay away from the word platform as a service. But do they begin to start moving into that next generation of Amazon that is much more vertical focused, or do we see them continue to let their partners, the SI partners and others, drive that portion of it, and they sort of keep delivering the underlying platform? So a lot of those big things, and then obviously we'll talk about a lot more as we talk about predictions. What are you looking for?
So wow, so many things to look forward to at the show, Brian. I do like the ecosystem that's growing. It's been very different. When I went first time a couple of years ago, there was really that dichotomy between really the enterprise and the developers. So there were all these gaming companies, all these mobile companies, all of those kind of newer applications that, many of them really are deploying SaaS environments. So, and you really had that group and the enterprise, and over the last 2 years, you've seen just it kind of grow to, it is quite a different crowd than, say, VMworld was. There are some more similarities. Some of the same companies are showing up with different parts of it. Everybody's trying to really understand, where this wave is going. And actually, so Brian, I just put into the crowd chat some data that we put out looking at public cloud, because while we've been steeped in this for a lot of years, still, when you say cloud, it's not a monolithic thing. There's lots of different segments, and the big category in the space is really on the application side, talking about software as a service. SaaS in 2014 was about 2/3 of the overall market, and mostly what we're talking about at Amazon is infrastructure as a service and a little bit platform as a service. So, I guess the question I have for you, Brian, is how's Amazon doing it moving up the stack? How are they doing it building out applications? And, how much do we pay attention to infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, since there's so much going on in the software as a service space?
Right. And obviously the data that Wikibon published, we highlighted that SaaS is, by far the largest segment of the public cloud market as a whole. It's still growing extremely fast, although over time we think that that'll flatten out a little bit. I mean, to me, I look at it as Amazon is very much extending what they've done around retail. They weren't, they didn't necessarily make the goods, but they delivered that platform to let you do that. So, it's interesting. We go to so many events, we go to meetups, we go to conferences, and the companies that so many people are talking about, whether it's an Airbnb or an Uber or whatever is the disruptive platforms these days, the good chunk of them are built on top of Amazon. So while they don't directly monetize SaaS, they very much indirectly monetize SaaS, absolutely. And I think they're trying to. My take is they're trying to figure out which additional services do we offer to help those SaaS companies, and they have sort of a very unique advantage in that they're very close to their customers. There's not a whole lot of middlemen in between, like we've seen with traditional vendors, where you've got SIs and VARs and distributors and things. They're very close to their customers, especially their large customers. They get a sense of which services are they using, and then which ones are they kind of building themselves. And then you always see Amazon come along and go, oh, well, here's a new service that's going to make those 2 or 3 others that you had to put together sort of obsolete. Now we do it all as one thing. So we've seen them do it on the database side. We're starting to see them do it on some of the mobile applications. So I think that's still where they want to play. I don't think they want to necessarily be there, kind of compete with the SaaS vendors, but they absolutely want to compete with the IaaS and the PaaS vendors.
Well, the statement that I really took notice of last year was Amazon said, if you're a kind of a traditional vendor and you're making too much margin, we're coming after you.
Yeah.
So they launched a database last year. They've tried to go into various application spaces, and absolutely, if there's areas that Amazon can pick off that are high margin value that they can just bake into the stack, I definitely expect to see them do that. But Brian, when you tweeted out who's going to be there, Adrian Cockcroft said all of him will be there, and it's always one of the things I look forward to at reInvent is just the community that there is phenomenal. So you mentioned some of the meetups, some of the after parties. It's definitely one of those shows where the hallway conversations and the evening hours are as important, if not more important, than what goes on during kind of the keynotes, the sessions in the show floor.
Right. So we're obviously lots of build up to reInvent next week. This week, yesterday, Microsoft sort of stole the spotlight a little bit. They had AzureCon, big virtual event, most of the day virtual event. A lot of really interesting announcements from them, and they've been one of the companies. When we put our public cloud forecasts out there and our market share, I mean, if you add up all of the things that Microsoft's doing today in the cloud, they really are the number one in terms of revenues. What impressed you from what Amazon, or not Amazon, what Azure was doing yesterday in terms of their announcements, in terms of the direction they're trying to set?
Yeah, so Brian, you and I were talking about this before we kicked off the segment, and Microsoft is really starting to move fast. One of the things that we've said in describing Amazon is, when do you see a company that is the market leader that just continues to push forward and move as fast as they are? Dave Vellante, our chief analyst here at Wikibon, has said that Amazon's like a cheetah. It's like, they're not only the 800-pound gorilla, but they're moving fast, they're adding new features. And Microsoft, in the last year, has really impressed me as to how fast they're moving. The big one we've highlighted a number of times is what they're doing in the container space. Of course, a lot of buzz of what Microsoft announced at AzureCon, partnership. They're working not only with Docker, but working with Mesos to how they do it. What's it called? The Azure Container Service, I believe.
Yep, Service Fabric, and yep.
Yeah, and they're really adding a lot of pieces. So to compete in this cloud market space, it takes a lot of effort. We've seen it multi-billions of dollars to build out the infrastructure. Microsoft made announcements that they are the first major public cloud provider to put, I don't know if it was just data centers or multiple data centers in India, but they've got Microsoft's claiming that they've got the broadest global footprint. And absolutely, from a growth standpoint, now Microsoft's actually growing faster than Amazon is overall. And as you stated, if you take kind of Office 365, all the various pieces that Microsoft has, and put them together in their cloud portfolio, they are number one, which is kind of surprising to a lot of people. But it doesn't mean that they've surpassed Salesforce on SaaS, or that they've surpassed Amazon on infrastructure as a service. But Microsoft is across the board doing well, growing really fast, and there's more interesting stuff to talk about Microsoft than 2 years ago. It was like Xbox and a couple of other pieces, but wow, they're a real player in the space, and doing a lot with open source. I mean, Brian, if I look at Amazon and Microsoft, and you say, okay, who's actually contributing and participating to the open source community? Microsoft had a lot of good open source content in the announcements yesterday.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and the companies are going to take a very different approach to this. Amazon takes the approach where they're building some services, they're kind of getting feedback from the customers or the users, and they kind of iterate on it. Microsoft, in order for them to, I think, be really successful, they've got to build sometimes ahead of what their customers need. Sometimes they're keeping up in terms of matching what Amazon does, but I think in terms of them selling, they've got such a huge installed base. They've got a huge channel. They've got a huge field. They've got to build out a ton of things so that their field and their people that are buying from them can sort of see what's available. And I think what they announced yesterday was really, they did a really good job of checking a lot of boxes. Some that are very buzzworthy. You talked about the container service that's built on Docker and Mesos and Mesosphere. A big IoT suite. They've got the money to invest in data centers worldwide. I think that's going to become a much bigger deal, especially as the cloud grows outside the United States. Is people concerned about data sovereignty? They need data centers in all the major locations, and then they talked about the 3 huge regions in India. So I was really impressed with what Azure had yesterday. It was very technology centric. I mean, it had a certain amount of customers in there. But they're going to, if they're smart, and I think they're finally starting to come around to it, they've become much less technology, religious. They're a little more agnostic. They, they openly talked about Linux. They openly talked about Windows and Linux together. I think we're going to see a very competitive market between those two, and everything is based out of Seattle. So it's interesting. We always talk about the Bay Area. Microsoft and AWS, both based out of Seattle. A lot of smarts up in that region.
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. We refer to it as Cloud City now. So there are a lot of big companies up there, and not only just Microsoft and Amazon, but Google's got a strong presence there.
Right.
You've got companies like CenturyLink have big outposts there. Even Apple has been building up there. So absolutely, kind of the central point of what's going on in cloud. Wow. So, yeah, Brian, I want to dig into a little thing you talked about there. Is we've been talking about, it's no longer is one company going to kind of build, everything. You said, VMware might have been the last company to say, okay, I'm going to build, really a platform there. I'm going to get, such a large percentage of what gets built, in and around it.
Right.
Even VMware, for years we talked about how they built out the ecosystem. Used to say for every $1 you spent on VMware software, you spent $15, $20 on not only hardware else, but other software. When you look at Amazon, you look at Microsoft. How much opportunity is there for the partner ecosystem, both on the technology side, is how do they build with and partner with, and as well as from a channel standpoint. How is that ecosystem, and how much really value in the marketplace do you see each of those guys building?
Right. I think there's tremendous opportunity for value. I think or value creation, channel value creation. I think it's just you have to shift your mindset. I don't think you think about what those guys ultimately do, and the biggest thing that they're eating into is going to be that reseller, that channel partner who does hardware-centric business, rack and stack business, anything around design for networks, design for infrastructure. That business is being eaten into rapidly, and so that's the piece where you go, okay, that's the biggest impact. The biggest opportunity is going to be around any channel partners, any SIs, any ISVs that do software. And the beauty of it is all that time in procurement and budgeting around infrastructure sort of begins to go away, and a lot more time is going to get focused on applications. And what we're seeing is, more and more people are building applications, whether they're mobile applications or they're homegrown applications. Open source is helping with that. And the other thing that's interesting is we're starting to see more and more companies, whether they're SIs or they're VARs, beginning to consolidate around people that have expertise in building applications or in integration around APIs and so forth. So I think that's, the entire industry sort of has to move up stack if you're going to have a play around public cloud. And I think there's going to be huge opportunity there. There's a reason all these guys are announcing IoT things. We just saw, GE and some others announce industrial internet platforms. There's a lot of opportunity, but you have to be able to begin to start to speak some sort of API and application centric language to be part of that value capture.
Yeah, great points there, Brian. Go ahead, please.
You cover both cloud and infrastructure. You're talking to the infrastructure vendors, the leading ones. How much do they see this impacting them? And do you ever get a sense of timelines that they feel like, customers are always going to refresh their own infrastructure, especially the ones that have to for various reasons. Do you get the sense they're starting to panic a little bit, or do you get the sense that they feel like this is just making the overall pie bigger and they'll continue to do well in this space, even if they're selling on-premises?
Yeah, that's the multi-billion-dollar question there, Brian.
Right.
And the critique I think we've had is that the traditional infrastructure vendors on the last few years, it's the public cloud side, let's kind of ignore it, or maybe let's we're going to have a multi-cloud option, and maybe we've got a cloud option for you. So you look over the last couple of years, and you've got Oracle, IBM, HP, the VMware EMC Federation, all these companies that have been used to selling boxes and licenses, and saying, well, we're going to give you a public cloud. But the reality is that the big public clouds out there of Amazon and Azure, they haven't had a great story as to how they tie into them.
Right.
Some have more than others. It'd be interesting. We're going to talk to NetApp at reInvent next week, and NetApp not building their own public clouds. They partner with a lot of service providers. Right. They use the Direct Connect, where they put a filer in, say, an Equinix rack, or some place where they can have direct access into it. I don't know that I think publicly that the big companies are panicking. And if you look at our forecast, we say that it's not like the data center on-premises enterprise owning stuff goes away anytime in the next few years, but over the next 10 years, I mean, it's a third of all revenue there that's going to go to public cloud. So That is something that needs to shift. IBM has gotten themselves in the mix of being one of the larger cloud providers. Right. And have really focused on the applications. So where I've been impressed is the companies that are helping to move that mix of where applications are going. It was actually one of the things I was happy to see at EMC World this year, is that EMC spent a little less time talking about storage, which is their bread and butter, and talking about their application journey and where they were helping people. So I think, Brian, publicly, I think the face that I hear on the infrastructure companies is still a little bit of the Seattle deniers, I think people have said. But it's where we've seen good things is how they understand that some things are going to go in the big guys, some things might go on a public cloud that they own, some things are going to be hosted, some things they're going to keep in house. We've been talking to the HP Helion group has gone through some refreshes lately, and the positioning these days at least acknowledge the fact that you're going to be using Amazon and Azure in the product mix, because I mean, one of the things, Brian, I look at, we're going to hear Amazon talking about all in next week, and while companies might love Amazon and are using a lot of their services, that doesn't mean that there isn't any software or any other hardware from other vendors in their environment. Every customer that I talked to last year, even the ones that were kind of the marquee ones, if you said, do you use Office 365, the answer was yes. If they're not using Office 365, they're probably using Google at work.
Right.
And they're all using Salesforce. So it definitely is, that portfolio. If we said the role of the CIO going forward is going to have to be very much a portfolio manager and be able to handle that. So any color you want to add on that, Brian?
Yeah, no, I think 2 points. One, I think, the all-in strategies, obviously we see it from Oracle. We hear about it from VMware to a certain amount, although they've been a little more open lately. It sounds great on the day of a keynote or an announcement. It's a little tougher in practice because, especially if it's at the application layer, if it's at the underlying infrastructure layer, maybe at the application layer, it's much harder. And then I think, you mentioned IBM. I think we're starting to see the beginning of what these clouds are, where their strategies are starting to go. I think, IBM obviously wants to be everything to everybody, but they're putting a lot around what they can do with Watson, what they can do in terms of manage. So they're very much going back to the idea that, let IBM help manage what you're trying to do, whether it's mobile, IoT, data, infrastructure. I think with Microsoft, we're beginning to see them say, look, they talked yesterday, they openly said, look, we have a hybrid strategy. We have an enterprise-centric strategy. I think that plays to their strength. I think people, the trust in Microsoft is there. And then I think Google, we haven't talked a lot about the Google platform. I think more and more we're going to see them, not so much directly compete as an infrastructure company. I think we're going to see them offer more and more data-centric services and more vertical services. I think that plays to their strength of, we've got massive networks to move data, and we've got, tons of expertise in terms of doing interesting things around data. And I think once we start to see those things separate, it might make it a little bit easier for CIOs who are going, what is the type of problem I'm trying to solve? And then what's the most appropriate place to try and solve that or leverage resources to help me do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Google's come out publicly and stated that they're really focused on the analytics, and Google's also partnering with a lot of companies. We saw Google partners with VMware. Google, I believe they partner with IBM. So there's a lot going on there. So in the crowd chat, Brian, we've got that going on too. We've got a question for you. Is what's the top cloud native message that you expect to be hearing next week?
So, I think the thing is, Amazon makes a big deal of kind of not wanting to get pulled back into the definitions that the mass industry used. They were very adamant that cloud was public cloud, and what you did on premises was your data center. They didn't like to call it private cloud. I don't know that they're going to sort of adopt the cloud native term so much, because I think their thing is all of their current customers are building what's the future. But I think what they will be doing around cloud native, or the idea of cloud native, is they're going to make a big deal that this segment of the market, as opposed to people just migrating legacy applications or non-differentiating applications, is growing faster. And more importantly, it is making a bigger impact to the top line of businesses. So I think we're going to hear them continue to pound that drum, that it's not just, hey, you can use on-demand services and you're kind of, going around IT. They're going to be very focused on, this is the way to differentiate your business. This is the way to grow new businesses. This is where all the innovation is happening. And if you're not in this space, you're going to struggle. And I think they're going to basically tell people, like, look, we have the most experience in this space, given that 99% of our customers are essentially cloud native customers. So I think they're going to push that very hard. I think that's a little bit different than some of the folks that have adopted the cloud native thing, which are trying to get into the enterprise and talk about transformation and so forth.
Yeah, that's great. Brian, you've been digging into a lot of those companies, kind of the structured and unstructured.
Right.
Any feedback? What data are you hearing as to when companies deploy their solutions and build applications, how much of them are living on AWS? How many of them are living on-prem? How many are going to other public clouds? What data can you share?
Yeah, I think AWS has become sort of the de facto place where you're going to go trial everything. I heard a great stat from somebody the other day, and it was, you had to put it in a little bit of context, but they said there are literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of projects that run on Amazon Web Services that are, in that $10,000 to $20,000 a year range. So, a couple of $1,000s a month. You can experiment with a lot of things. You can try out a lot of new technology, whether it's native to Amazon or you're using, container technology, scheduling technology, whatever that might be. So I think there's a lot of projects that stay below the radar that companies are trying to figure out, development organizations, skunkworks, lighthouse types of things that are trying to figure out, can I move them? And obviously all the things that are going on with containers these days are really exciting because they give you the ability to say, I could replicate what I do in Amazon in my own data center or in a co-located facility or just even in any other cloud provider. I think it's still very early days unless that's your entire business. If you are Uber, you're Airbnb, you're somebody else who's a SaaS company. I think it's still very early days. I mean, we use the analogy of it sort of in the first inning. I think that's still where it is, but that idea that you can get a lot done for a couple of $1,000s a month and really prove out your ideas. We're going to see more and more of that going on, and a lot of that's going to stay off the radar for IT organizations and even finance groups, because a couple of $1,000s on your credit card is not that hard to expense.
Yeah. So Brian, do you think? I mean, most of this, do you still call it stealth IT there? If it's somebody off on the side, we've been talking about IT really trying to, get this all under control. Maybe you can elaborate a little more.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the whole terminology of stealth IT. I think it comes across as being very negative. The traditional IT vendor industry and even the IT industry likes to call it stealth IT because I think they believe they're the only purveyor that should be dealing with technology. I like to just call it it's innovation. It's unmet. It's unmet innovation. And it's a lot of it's being driven by the product owners, by the business centric people. And the reality is their skills have evolved that they're becoming more digital in their business. So whether you're an automotive company, I mean, if you watch any auto ad, you watch a commercial for a car, they never talk about unless you're just talking about trucks and towing power, everything is the electronics in the car, the experience in the car, the way that you're going to connect. I mean, all that is software in the vehicle, and you can extend that out to almost any industry. You're hearing John Deere talk about, software for farming. You're hearing about all these other industries. No, I don't think it's shadow IT. I really think it's just businesses becoming much more digital.
Yeah, it's funny, Brian. I think back, about 12, 13 years ago, when I was working for a big company, we'd gone to IT for a massive project, and IT said no. So we didn't have Amazon. So we spun up a group. It took over a year of development. We had web people in India. I was managing a team that kind of spanned 3 different countries, and we needed to get things done to move the business forward, and therefore we did it ourselves. So if I'd had Amazon, we probably could have done that project in a matter of a month or 2 rather than taking a year and building out everything ourselves. So you're right. But if I'm sitting in IT's shoes, they said that's not a sanctioned IT project, and eventually over a couple of years we ended up transferring that back to IT. So at least our advice has been that IT needs to understand what's going on. They need to be more of a partner with the business, and they need to enable that to happen. So I guess we've been beating this drum for a bunch of years, and I agree. Hopefully the term stealth IT can go away over time, but IT needs to be flexible and open enough to allowing more of these things to move forward. Right.
Well, and I think we heard this at one of the events last year. I think it was the HP Vertica event. You guys had a client come on from, I believe it was Royal Dutch Shell. It was one of the huge energy companies, and his CIO had basically come to him and said, look, 80% of the spend I'm doing for quote unquote IT is non-differentiated. And, we all understand that there's a lot that has to go on to keep the systems running, to keep the lights on. But when you put things in those terms, it's very hard to justify, why you're doing it the same way. Now you may need the same applications to run, but if you're not saying, boy, if it's that big of a thing and it's not impacting the business in terms of differentiation, it's going to drive people to be innovative and figure out new ways to help the top line of the business.
So, yep. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just looking over here at the crowd chat to see what was going on.
So Brian, when we look at Amazon, Amazon's been really good about not looking at the competition. They kind of go off, they do their thing, they listen to their customers. I poke at them a little bit because they always come out and they say, oh, we had 157 new innovations that came out. And I said, well, new product innovation, maybe. A dot release of a product that's been around for 2 years now. I'm not sure that I'd necessarily call it innovation. But I wonder, when you look at the marketplace, where are some of the threats to Amazon? We talked a little bit about Microsoft before. I heard Tim Cook from Apple recently said that there's almost no line between consumer and enterprise when they look at it anymore. So does Apple become a potential threat to Amazon? I want to see, when you look kind of at the larger landscape, what are kind of those dangers, and where might Amazon not be leading?
Yeah, so I think there's a ton of threats to Amazon. When you put them in context, it's great that they're breaking out their financials now. They're going to be somewhere in that $6 to $10 billion range for 2015, and maybe it's closer to 8 or something. You put that in perspective. There's a dozen companies that throw off more cash than them on a regular basis that are still going to be very competitive with them. You're starting to see the companies that are building on top of them that are looking at, how do I move off of them? I mean, Netflix is a perfect example. Everybody loves to talk about Netflix as being a great Amazon customer. The reason they do Netflix OSS, part of it's to help them, hire people and put things out there, but it's also to get people to help them figure out, how do I decouple themselves potentially from an Amazon, because they want to say, hey, how do I move into new markets? Other cloud providers might do that. I think the big things for Amazon is, their cash flow is still sort of interesting, because you don't know how much is AWS, how much is Amazon, and that impacts how many new data centers they can build, which will be a big deal when they want to get into China. It'll be a big deal when they want to expand in Europe, if they want to get into every country. So that's a big deal in terms of, purely data centers. How do they do that? I think if more and more companies begin to buy into the idea of working with PaaS platforms, that has the ability to sort of commoditize what Amazon does, and it allows people to begin to say, hey, I could use something like Cloud Foundry and run that on Azure. I can run it on Rackspace. I can run it on CenturyLink. I can run it on Orange or China Telecom. So that's a huge threat to them. Apple really hasn't made any play. I mean, they've been very weak in terms of cloud. If the IoT thing takes off in terms of like wearable devices, or the mobile application piece takes off even more, Apple could be a humongous player there. And then Wikibon did a huge bit of research last year around the industrial internet. When we talk about the Internet of Things, that has the opportunity to be a third of that. You're seeing people like GE and some others that are in that space going, hold on a second, platforms win. I probably need to own and drive that platform. So there's a huge number of threats in a big picture for Amazon. They're by no means going to take everybody's money. But I think more than anybody else, they've embraced the idea that everything is on demand, and they're going to take this feedback loop that they have from customers and build better. I don't know that everybody else has quite embraced the game that they're playing. But they do have a ton of threats. This isn't by any means going to be a cakewalk to get to 50 billion or whatever the big number they potentially could be in 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, and just to share a little bit data with our audience, we showed our numbers for Amazon for 2014 was 4.6 billion. First half of this year was 3.3 billion, and we're estimating that there'll be a 7.5 billion by the end of the year. So over 60% growth. Really, moving forward at a tremendous rate. And yeah, Brian, you made a lot of great points there. Today, the Amazon API really is the standard out there.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, it's
I'm not sure, Brian. We saw the OpenStack guys fight with that. It's you may not like it, but when something is the de facto thing, you've got to figure out how you're going to work around that and then innovate faster.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pushback from really the open source community on this. Is that still a threat for Amazon? Have people gotten over it? Because there's really not a great, I guess there's OpenStack, but
right. Well, I think in terms of people building themselves. So there was a really good piece that was written this week. We got a nice mention in it. It was written by Alexis Richardson, who runs Weave, and he sort of said, look, there's if you're not going to build on Amazon, or if you don't want to build to Amazon's sort of blueprint and model, but you want to build more modern cloud native applications, there are some alternatives out there now, and that's what we're seeing. The sort of combination, we wrote about it in terms of container and cloud native. There are PaaS platforms, there are sort of container-centric unstructured platforms that are out there, Docker, Mesosphere, Kubernetes. HashiCorp just had a ton of announcements this week trying to help people build platforms. Again, we go back to, if Amazon's a $7 billion company, even growing at 60%, at some point they're going to hit the law of big numbers, which make growth difficult. And there's a lot of companies that want to build themselves. I mean, that are builders. And the nice thing is, the years of experience of how to build some of these things, that technology is in open source. There's thriving communities around it, and there's beginning to be commercialization around that. So there's options for customers. They're not simple by any means. I mean, they're by no means going to be as simple as spinning up an Amazon instance. But if you want to own your platform, whether you build or you buy it, there's some very good opportunities for customers that are becoming more and more mature. And I think that keeps Amazon on their toes, and it keeps people trying to figure out what's the right path for that. We've written some coverage about that. I think people have liked the idea of structured and unstructured, and we're going to dig into that even more going forward.
Yeah, I guess, Brian, one of the things we've put forward and said, if I want to be a player in public cloud,
Right.
It might be too late, because it's not a couple of billion. We're talking tens of billions to try to get the infrastructures out there.
Right.
And per quarter, there's putting a couple of billion in there when you talk to what Microsoft, Amazon, and even IBM are putting into their environments. I'm actually one of the things the highlight for me the last couple of years, we've gotten to interview James Hamilton, and I've always gone to his sessions. And when I look through the show catalog, he's actually not giving a session. So I'm going to have to dig a little deeper to find out who's giving the infrastructure talk there. But you've had a chance to look through the show catalog. Anything you've picked out as to kind of announcements they might be telegraphing, or sessions that you're excited to hear about?
Yeah, we joked we had sort of a conspiracy theory that we think James is probably off working on some big multi-year project. But for me, there's a number of areas I think that'll be interesting. I think there's a lot of people that are anxious to see if they will talk about hybrid. And again, when they say hybrid, people are really saying, like, will you get deeper into what today's enterprises do? I don't know. I think they sort of dance around it. I think they will begin to do some things that on the surface may seem fairly benign. I think they'll make announcements around things like directory integration, Active Directory and LDAP and so forth. That'll seem fairly small, and then you'll say, oh yeah, that's critical, because every enterprise application is based around that directory service for authentication and security and so forth. I think we will see them pound on the storage vendors in terms of pricing. I think they're going to pound on some of the mobile stuff. I think they're going to try very, very hard to try and become the de facto place where you build, you run a mobile application, you test a mobile application, the back-end services are there to make all the notification stuff simple. And I think they're gonna try and combat what IBM and Microsoft and some others are doing around IoT. I think they're very distinctly aware that could be as big as the rest of the existing internet, and they don't want to be left behind as just infrastructure. I think they want to have a platform around that. So I expect them to telegraph some things around that space as well. What about you? What either in terms of the types of customers or the things that are out there, what's interesting to you, or what speculation do you have about what they may announce? Because that's always a big thing. They don't tip their hand on the roadmap very much.
Yeah, and Brian, you mentioned the customers is one of the areas that I really like digging in. Last year, in the kind of private analyst session, we got to hear from the CIA. So you talk about kind of a hybrid cloud. Sure, if I want to build my own version of Amazon, you just signed a $100 million contract, and Amazon will be happy to do that for you.
Right.
But realistically, I think you're right. You know, how much they kind of eat into that hybrid and make it easier to, you know, pull everything into the Amazon environment. But, you know, just the maturation of where customers are is just something that, you know, I definitely like to be able to dig into. You know, there's really the two things. What are they doing that's different? And the other thing is, you know, how much of their legacy applications are they really moving? Because, you know, as David Floyer constantly, you know, points out in the research that we write, migration is really tough. And, you know, if you talk about like the storage world, you know, just the migration costs of buying from one generation to the next of gear has been one of the highest costs when we talk about the overall cost of things. So, you know, well, there was the cost of things, what's being done different. Yeah,
I mean, there was a couple of announcements that they made in the Azure thing yesterday, which kind of jumped out at me a little bit, that I don't think got a lot of press, but are really important as we talk about that sort of customer space. One of them was they announced some more simplified pricing. And one of the biggest things that people complain about with Amazon is, you know, maybe not what it costs. Sometimes people will get a big bill, but just, you know, how do you price it is complicated. You know, if you live by the hour, that's great if you want to think about things in short term, but if you want to try and plan stuff, they don't. Azure came out with a, you know, sort of a prepaid, prepackaged way of doing pricing. That kind of stuff's important. You know, will AWS stuff up and simplify that? And the other one is they came out with a, and I'll get the wording wrong, but essentially it was a service that says if you're in the financial services industry and you need, you know, to do penetration testing or you need to do auditing and compliance stuff, we're going to give you much more transparency in what we're doing. And we're going to give you a dedicated team that's going to help make sure that as you're moving your stuff into the cloud, for whatever that might be, we're going to have a team there that's basically there to help support you. And things like that, support, pricing, they're not sexy. They don't always get a whole lot of headlines, but they're at the core of what the enterprise has to do when you're dealing with big multinationals. So I'll be looking for that stuff as well. And like you said, it's part of this transition plan. And sometimes the hard stuff people don't want to talk about, but you have to do it if you want to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, Brian, it was funny. It blew my mind the first year when I went to reInvent, and they had launched their trusted advisor service. And I talked to all these practitioners that were like, this is really awesome because I found out I was like highly inefficient and wasting all this money, and thank you. And it was like, if this had been a traditional like infrastructure company, it's, you know, or software company where you said, you know, oh, hey, you know, we're going to do this evaluation. And it turns out you're not using 3/4 of the licenses that you're paying for, you know, oops, you know, it shocks me the things that customers are willing to let go, or, you know, hey, look at Wall Street is, you know, Amazon got away with, you know, not making profits for years, but that's kind of the game they play. So, you know, kind of very different discussion. Amazon has been a really interesting show. I mean, the vibe at the show is phenomenal. You know, just
tons of energy.
Excited, they're learning. There's so much going on, and you know, the career growth discussions are definitely kind of interesting.
Right. No, absolutely. And they've been pushing very hard about, you know, training the next set of people. I get a thing in my email every day from somewhere that says, hey, you know, come get an Amazon certification. Here's the path for getting Amazon certifications. When you have an ecosystem that big, and I think I saw an infographic from somebody, I mean, their ecosystem is 5 or 10 times as big as it was in 2012. So the number of companies that are showing up, the number of companies that can do things with Amazon, I mean, it's a huge center of gravity for, you know, for where things are shifting. So, you know, hugely important. And when you're that big of a center of gravity, you've got to help your ecosystem as much as you're helping yourself. Otherwise, you know, they'll find alternatives that will help them be profitable.
Yeah, it's curious you say that, Brian, because you know, one of the challenges is when you talk to everybody, partnering with Amazon is a little bit, you know, sitting down to the picnic with the bear.
Right.
You kind of wonder if I'm going to get mauled and if I'm going to get to eat anything.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah,
there's always this interesting thing that as soon as they do the keynote, figure out, okay, which of these people that just spent, you know, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 on a big booth won't be here next year because they're now their entire business is one Amazon service. Which
yeah,
is
you mean like the largest booth 2 years ago, I think, was Citrix, and they announced Workspaces. So
right.
we have kind of walked on over there and said, what do you know? Citrix, I don't think had as big a booth. They did have a booth at last year's event, but yeah, it's always Oracle is always like that too. It seemed like whoever did the keynote next year wouldn't even be a partner.
Right. Yeah, no, it plays the, and it goes to that idea that platforms win, right? If you own the platform and control the platform, as long as you don't screw it up, it's a winning place to be. And but it's a difficult place. It's a difficult build and it's complicated. I think VMware. We just got done with VMworld. I mean, VMware was sort of the last, enterprise-centric platform that people will build on, and now we're looking at these new communities and platforms that people are building upon.
All right, so Brian, I think we can probably wrap up the video. I want to give you the last chance. What items you especially interested in looking at, or any hypothesis that you want to test while we're at the show next week.
So to me, there's a couple of things. One is sort of innovation, and one is sort of enterprise. One is I'm always super interested in seeing these companies that pop up sort of out of nowhere, and they're able to do it because these new platforms allow them to do that. We were looking at people that are speaking, really interesting ones. You're a huge NFL fan. DraftKings, who if you're watching football these days is annoying you like crazy because they're buying so many ads. They didn't exist a year and a half ago, at least in anybody's conscious. They're now huge. They're signing deals with the NFL. I mean, the sort of gambling day-to-day fantasy football. I mean, they disrupted the entire fantasy football market, which is a tens of billions. That stuff is really interesting to me because it's something that every CIO should be looking at. How would you disrupt yourself? And then the other part to me that I'm always looking at this event is, beyond just working with Amazon, there's lots of companies that are helping traditional IT, but they're delivering it as a SaaS application, right? We've talked to people like Blue Box and Platform 9 and others, Datadog and others that do this stuff. I'm always interested in those companies because while they're part of the AWS ecosystem, they're helping traditional IT be successful as well, and sometimes build the bridge to being able to move faster or save money. So those are always the two big areas is finding that balance between the really cool innovation stuff and the, what helps traditional IT get better. What about you?
Yeah, Brian, I think you nailed it. So, we're going to have a full lineup on theCUBE.
Yep.
Looking forward to, as I said before, a lot of practitioners. So really understanding, how they're adopting that shift, how they're really helping to accelerate some of the business. Alan Cohen, who we actually had on theCUBE last year, there was a line that I love that he used. He said, there's kind of the triangle in IT, and you say, there's too often the people that are saying no, or if they go, they're kind of going slow, and we want to get them to go. So that's where Amazon is really helping to accelerate what's happening. Faster is one of the biggest imperatives we hear. Definitely something I've seen you write a lot about in the cloud native platforms.
Right.
So how are we accelerating? What was the line I think Adrian Cockcroft used at DockerCon is, we've gone to plaid on containers.
Right, in terms of speed.
So in terms of speed, and Amazon's definitely an enabler for a lot of these fast moving things. So
right.
I'm interested to see, you talked about the law of large numbers. The last year, actually, Amazon seems to be picking up a little bit. There was some price drops a year ago with kind of Google and Microsoft fighting over it. And while prices continue to drop, the growth just seems to kind of hit that next wave. So, Amazon's growing in the 60% range, Microsoft's growing in the 80% range, and they're both in the multi-billions of dollars and still growing. We think that there's, it's not going to be petering out over the next couple of years, but actually we're starting to hit that knee of acceleration.
Right.
What signal can we get there and help understand it? So yeah, Brian, I think, looking forward to it. You and I will be writing plenty of stuff on wikibon.com. The video is all going to be on siliconangle.tv. We've got 2 days of broadcast and might have a little bit also on the first day on Tuesday. They do an excellent analyst event leading up to it. Right before we drop, there's Dave Vellante. So Dave, if you can actually hear us and talk, we can say something. But otherwise,
Yeah, and we encourage people as we're doing the videos out in Las Vegas. You know, if you want to jump on, hit us up on Twitter. Love to answer questions or take questions for you about the guests and stuff. So, really looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks so much, Brian, for joining me. Looking forward to seeing Vegas, and we'll talk to you soon.
Great. Thanks, Stu.